So, today we're going to dive into a really personal story. It's about a soldier, someone trained for the chaos and noise of conflict, and how he found his way through the crushing silence that came after.
Wow. I mean, that one sentence just says it all, doesn't it? For someone who was trained to carry all this physical weight, the idea of facing himself on a blank page, that felt heavier, more impossible than anything. It really sets the stage for a totally different kind of battle.
So, when the missions were over and he came back home, the external war was done. But a whole new war, an internal one, was just getting started. And this one wasn't fueled by noise. It was fueled by this really profound and difficult silence.
And just look at this contrast here, because it's so stark. On the left, you've got the very training that keeps a soldier alive, right? Suppress your emotions, stay hyper alert, always move forward. But then, on the right, you see how that exact same training became like a poison back in civilian life. It created this crushing silence that was just filled with unresolved memories and this deep feeling of being disconnected from everyone.
The signs started small, the kinds of things you could just brush off. He was having trouble sleeping, his patience was thin, he had that constant feeling of being on edge, And he felt this growing distance from his family and friends, but he didn't have the words for what was happening yet.
And here's the real barrier he was up against. His entire identity, his training, everything he believed about what it meant to be a soldier was telling him the same thing. Just push through it. The idea of actually stopping to deal with these feelings, well, that felt like weakness.
But the thing is, you can only push through for so long. And eventually, he hit a wall. And this wasn't the physical exhaustion he was trained for. This was something different. It was a deep, soul-crushing mental fatigue that his training had never, ever prepared him for.
So, get this. Picking up that notebook, it wasn't an act of hope. It was an act of pure desperation. He reached for it as an absolute last resort, with zero belief that it would actually do anything for him. He was just completely out of other options.
And that first attempt at writing, it was anything but graceful. It was awkward, it was messy, just a few sentences and half-finished thoughts. He wasn't trying to be strong or put on a brave face anymore. He was just letting some of the pressure out.
The very first thing that came out onto the page was just pure, raw anger, unfiltered and probably unnamed until that very moment.
And then came the confusion, the why behind all the anger, that feeling of just being lost in his own life.
That was followed by guilt, the heavy weight of past decisions, of moments that he'd been carrying around completely silently.
And finally, fear. The one emotion he was never, ever supposed to admit to, let alone actually feel. It was all there, finally out of his head and on the page.
And what began as this simple, desperate act, well, it started to evolve into something incredibly powerful. It started changing from this chaotic outlet into a real source of clarity.
The effect was almost immediate, and honestly, probably pretty surprising for him. Just a simple act of getting his thoughts out of his head and onto the page made them feel manageable. They weren't some chaotic storm swirling inside him anymore. They were just words on a piece of paper.
You can really see how his whole journaling practice grew up over time. It started as pure venting, just getting it all out. Then it became a daily habit. And through that consistency, he started to see these hidden patterns in his own thoughts and behaviors. And that led to the final, most life-changing step, using the journal to start asking himself the really tough questions.
And this is where the journal totally transformed. It stopped being just a notepad and became more like a mirror. It allowed him not just to see his thoughts, but to finally understand himself and, for the first time, feel like he had some control over his own mind. So instead of just writing about a memory over and over, he started to investigate it. Why this one? Why does this particular moment have such a tight grip on me? This simple shift changed him from being a victim of his memories to being an investigator of them. Then he started digging even deeper, moving past that surface-level anxiety to really confront the core fear hiding underneath it all. Just writing the question down forced him to search for an answer, something that was impossible when the thought was just spinning around in his head.
Now, this is such a powerful technique. Think about it. By asking the question this way, he was able to step outside of his own self-criticism. He could offer himself the same compassion, the same solid advice he'd give to a buddy. It was a way to practice empathy for himself.
And it's so important to get this straight. The journal wasn't some kind of magic eraser for his past. The goal was never to forget what happened. The goal was to understand his triggers, to learn how to manage his reactions, and to finally finally gain control over his life, right here, in the present.
Which brings us to the final, really powerful idea from this whole story. It completely reframes what we think it means to be strong.
And this is the core lesson. The very definition of strength he had lived his entire life by, stoic, unbreakable silence, was completely dismantled. He learned that real strength isn't about suppressing your thoughts. It's about having the courage to actually face them.
So his journey kind of gives us this new definition of courage, doesn't it? It's not just about facing enemies out there, it's about the willingness to confront yourself, to fight that chaotic, difficult, and powerful battle right there on the blank page. And that is an incredible act of bravery. Which really just leaves us all with a question to think about. His battlefield was the unprocessed trauma of war. But we all have our own internal conflicts, don't we? It makes you wonder, what battle is waiting on your page?